Alex, congratulations. Thank you. How does it feel to be standing here having just defeated the defending champion on center court? There's a specific kind of silence that falls over a tennis court when a dream starts to die in front of 40 million people. Not the silence of a crowd holding its breath. The deeper silence. The one that arrives when everyone watching realizes at the same moment that the thing they were hoping for is slipping away faster than anyone can stop it. And Alex Eala walked straight into that silence on center court at Wimbledon. Her hands were shaking on a serve that used to be her shield. A whole nation was watching from living rooms and public arenas back home, praying across every time zone. And something invisible was already going wrong before most of the world had even found their seats. What broke her was not Paolini. It was closer than that. It was inside her. And the real reason she didn't win has far less to do with the final score than most people watching the match will ever fully understand. The night the nation held its breath. Let me take you back to Monday evening, the 6th of July, because that is where this whole story cracks open and everything underneath it becomes visible. Alex Eala walked on his center court, not as some hopeful underdog clinging to a fairy tale anymore, but as the woman who had just dismantled the defending champion 2 days earlier in one of the most stunning upsets Wimbledon had witnessed in years. The pressure sitting on her shoulders in that moment was unlike anything a Filipino athlete had ever carried into a tennis arena in the history of the sport. You could feel it in the way the crowd leaned forward every time she bounced the ball before serving. You could feel it in the particular hush that settled over the stadium during the rallies. By the time she lost that fourth-round match to Jasmine Paolini, 4-6, 6-4, and 3-6, something extraordinary had already happened far beyond the boundaries of the All-England club. More than 1.22 million people had watched the highlights of her Swiatek win on the Wimbledon YouTube channel, a figure that represented more than twice the audience that tuned in for matches involving Novak Djokovic and Serena Williams during the same tournament. Think carefully about what that number actually means. A 21-year-old from Quezon City, the daughter of a former professional tennis player who had moved the family to Barcelona so his daughter could train at the Rafael Nadal Academy, had pulled a larger online audience than two of the most celebrated athletes in the entire history of professional sport. That is not a footnote. That is a seismic cultural moment wearing tennis clothes. Back in the Philippines, the response had already moved well beyond sports coverage into something that resembled a national event. The government had opened the PhilSports Arena in Pasig City for a free public watch-along that could accommodate up to 8,000 fans. The crowds that gathered, there were the kind of crowds that gather for things that feel bigger than competition, for moments that feel like they belong to everyone. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. had publicly called her a true inspiration and noted that tennis does not operate at a higher level than Wimbledon, meaning that by reaching the fourth round, Eala had demonstrated genuine world-class quality that extended well beyond regional or continental measures of excellence. And when it was finally over, when the last ball had dropped into the tape and the score was sealed, Eala did not storm off the court in tears or retreat into the particular shell that young athletes sometimes disappear into when a big moment ends in loss. She shaped her hands into a heart, held them up toward a center court that had risen to its feet for her, and told her millions of followers watching across every platform to never say die and to play every point like your life depends on it. That standing ovation from a predominantly neutral crowd felt like a coronation dressed up as a goodbye. But here is the uncomfortable truth that nobody clapping in that stadium wanted to sit with. The very weapon that was supposed to carry her into the quarterfinals had abandoned her from the opening game of the match. And it was the one part of her game that everyone who followed women's tennis closely had been quietly and consistently worried about for more than a year. The weapon that turned on her. Now we arrive at the real reason, and it is not a comfortable or simple one. Eala did not lose that match because Paolini was some unstoppable force of nature operating at a level that no opponent could have touched. She lost it primarily because of her serve. And if you understand anything about the structural foundation of how she plays the game at her best, you already felt this coming before the first set had reached its midpoint. Her first serve on that Monday was floating across the net at a leisurely 80 miles per hour or below, and it was only finding the service box approximately half the time. The official statistics put her first serve percentage at 55.7, which means that on nearly every second point of the entire match, she was beginning the rally from a position of disadvantage before a single stroke had been exchanged. At one particularly difficult moment, one of her serves registered 65 miles per hour, which is a speed that recreational club players routinely produce on a Sunday morning when they are not fully concentrating. The lowest point of the serving performance came at 4-1 down in the opening set, when she pushed a first serve that barely grazed the bottom of the net, and then followed it immediately with a second serve that drifted long without trouble. There is a particular kind of deflation that passes through a player when that sequence happens in front of 15,000 people. You can see it in the shoulders. You can see it in the time between the fault and the next bounce of the ball. Here is where the damage compounds. She won only 48.7% of her second serve points across the match, and Paolini feasted on every soft delivery with the calm efficiency of someone who had identified the vulnerability early and committed to exploiting it without hesitation. Every second serve that arrived at a manageable pace was an invitation to step inside the baseline, take the ball early on the rise, and dictate the direction of the rally before Eala had time to establish her own position. When a player cannot trust her own serve, she stops playing tennis the way she was trained to play it and starts playing something more defensive and more apologetic. You defend when the situation demands attack. You flinch at the moment that requires the fullest commitment. You start the point hoping to survive it rather than to dominate it. And none of this was a revelation. The analyst Jill Gross had said publicly and on record that Eala possessed the weakest serve in the entire top 50 of the WTA rankings. Yet somehow she had sustained a position in the top 40 through the sheer quality of everything else in her game, through the depth and precision of her ground strokes, the intelligence of her movement, the competitive instincts that had been formed at the Nadal Academy under coaching that emphasizes mental toughness alongside technical development. The BBC commentator and Kia Thaving had highlighted during the tournament's earlier rounds that Eala's average second serve speed of 74 miles per hour sits measurably below the tour average of 86 and painfully below the top 10 average of 92. This was not a surprise that arrived without warning. It was a known structural vulnerability waiting for precisely the wrong conditions to become decisive. What makes the whole situation so painful when you look at it honestly is that this exact same slow serve had functioned as a genuine and effective weapon just 48 hours earlier against the world number one. Which means the question that should be sitting with you right now is not whether the serve is good enough. The question is what happened to Alex Eala in the 2 days between Saturday and Monday that turned a weapon into a liability. The ghost of Saturday's victory. The answer to that question lives not in any technical adjustment or physical deterioration, but in the 48 hours that preceded the Paolini match. And it is more profoundly human than any statistic can fully capture. Defeating Iga Swiatek was not simply a tennis result for Eala. It was an earthquake that registered across the entire landscape of her life and her country's relationship with sport. It was the biggest single emotional event of her 21 years on Earth, and it detonated on the grandest stage the sport possesses. You do not simply absorb that and return to baseline functionality. You do not walk off center court having just beaten the world's best player, spend 48 hours receiving the kind of national adulation that normally attaches itself to championship victories, and then reset your nervous system to match-ready equilibrium in time for the next assignment. Eala acknowledged this afterward with a kind of measured honesty that revealed more than the words themselves suggested. She said she did have to manage the emotions and that this was part of professionalism, and that it was not the first time she had scored a significant win and then had to perform again within 2 days. Read between those carefully chosen words, and what you hear is a young woman who spent the 48 hours between Saturday and Monday trying to descend from the highest emotional peak of her professional life, while the full weight of her country's hopes was simultaneously pressing down on her from every direction. The statistical evidence for what this emotional turbulence did to her serving is stark and specific. Against Swiatek on Saturday, she was averaging 86.3 miles per hour on her first serve. She produced 4 aces. She committed 0 double faults across the entire match. She won 55% of her second serve points. Swiatek herself confirmed in her post-match interview that the slow serve had caused her genuine difficulty mentally because the timing adjustments required were counterintuitive and uncomfortable. The serve was functioning exactly as it should. Then Monday arrived, and the same delivery transformed into something Paolini could read and attack at will. 3 double faults compared to 0. Below 50% on second serve points compared to 55. A Spanish analysis from Punto de Break concluded that the weight of expectation generated by the Swiatek victory had settled too heavily on her, and that she arrived on Monday neither as fresh nor as dominant as she had been 2 days earlier. She had also wrapped preventive tape around her left forearm, which she minimized when asked by, saying it was precautionary given the length of the season. So the body was carrying fatigue, and the mind was still partially residing somewhere back on Saturday afternoon. And yet, even drained and operating significantly below her best, Eala still found a way to win the second set and force a deciding third. That fact alone is the most important one in this entire story, because a player who is truly overmatched does not manufacture that kind of response. She had the tennis. What she did not yet fully possess was the accumulated experience to navigate what came next. The woman who knew how to wait. The full story of this match cannot be told honestly without giving Jasmine Paolini precisely the credit she deserves, because experience in sport is the quietest and most ruthless advantage that exists. Paolini is 30 years old. She has lived through versions of every fire that Eala is only beginning to approach. She is a former world number 4, the joint highest-ranked Italian woman in the history of women's professional tennis. She had reached the finals of both the French Open and Wimbledon in the same calendar year, an achievement that requires a specific quality of mental and physical resilience that cannot be manufactured or accelerated. She understands what the second week of a Grand Slam demands from a competitor in ways that Eala, for all her extraordinary talent, has not yet had the opportunity to learn through lived experience. The additional irony of Paolini's presence in this match is that she arrived at Wimbledon looking far more like an early exit than a genuine threat. Her season had been significantly disrupted by a foot injury that compromised her preparation on grass specifically, the surface that requires the most specialized physical adaptation. She had lost the opening set of the entire tournament by 6 games to love, which is about as difficult a beginning to a fortnight as a professional can experience. Most competitors in that position either abandon the tournament mentally or suffer a crisis of confidence that accelerates their exit. Paolini did neither. She looked at the situation with the equanimity of someone who has been through enough disappointments to understand that a bad first set says nothing definitive about what the next 10 days might contain. She built her performance back incrementally, point by point, game by game, the way that only veterans who have learned not to catastrophize in the middle of difficulty can do. That composure became decisive in the moments where the match was genuinely on the edge. When the pressure reached its absolute peak in the deciding set, Paolini won 94% of her first serve points. She dropped just 5 points on serve across the entire third set. She did not face a single break point during the moments when the match was being decided. She approached the net 27 times and converted 18 of those approaches, which reflects the confidence of a player who trusts her instincts completely when the stakes are highest. She even mentioned that seeing Roger Federer seated in the royal box had provided her with a particular kind of inspiration, calling him her idol and admitting she was working hard to avoid letting herself think too consciously about him watching. It is worth noting that Eala had actually defeated this same Paolini earlier in the year in Dubai, winning 6 games to 1 and 7 games to 6. This match was not decided by a talent gap. It was decided by the specific advantage that 30 years of competitive experience provides over 21 years of competitive experience when the pressure is at its most intense and the margin for error has contracted to almost nothing. The 2 points that changed everything. If you want to locate the precise moment where the match turned permanently, The statistics offer the most honest account of how close this actually was. At the midpoint of the deciding set, the total points won were 69 for Paolini and 68 for Eala. 1 point separated them. This was not a dominant victory. This was a match balanced on the thinnest possible edge, where the difference between a quarterfinal and an exit was essentially 1 or 2 decisions made or not made at the highest pressure moments. The sequence in the deciding set that ended Eala's tournament is the one that will stay with her. With the set level at 3 games apiece and Eala's serving, she built to 40-30. She was 2 points from holding for 4-all. She sent a backhand long to bring the game back to deuce. She pulled a forehand wide to give Paolini advantage. Then she produced a double fault at the least forgiving possible moment and followed it with another backhand sailing beyond the baseline, for unforced errors at the moment requiring 4 clean points. Paolini broke through to 5-3 and served out the match without facing further difficulty. Across the entire match, Eala converted 3 of her 10 break point opportunities. In a contest separated by 1 point at its midpoint, those missed opportunities represent the complete margin between the outcomes that were available to her. She acknowledged this in the press conference afterward, saying that at this level, everything comes down to very fine details. That observation was accurate and honest. What she may not have yet fully processed was that one of the most consequential of those details had been identified from the commentary booth by one of the sport's greatest ever competitors. What the legends saw that most people missed. While the public conversation focused almost entirely on Eala's emotional state and the romance of her story, Martina Navratilova was sitting in the BBC commentary booth watching something specific and specific only. She was watching the serve placement of a natural left-hander who is not using the geometric advantage that left-handedness provides on a tennis court. A graphic displayed during the second set confirmed what Navratilova was observing. Eala was directing far too high a proportion of her serves out wide in the deuce court and down the middle in the advantage court, which is precisely the inverse of the pattern a tactically intelligent left-hander should be executing. Only a third of her deliveries were using the slice that bends away from a right-handed opponent's backhand in the advantage court. Navratilova said directly that for a left-hander this was simply not making sense to her, and that Eala possesses that wicked lefty serve but consistently chooses not to deploy it in the locations that would maximize its damage. Laura Robson provided a counterpoint worth considering. She argued that without sufficient pace behind a wide serve to the advantage court, the delivery would simply sit at a comfortable height on Paolini's backhand and invite an aggressive return. The implication being that the placement choice only becomes genuinely advantageous when combined with pace that Eala's serve was not consistently generating on Monday. This disagreement between 2 knowledgeable former professionals illustrates that the tactical question here is more nuanced than a simple correction. The lefty advantage requires pace to be fully weaponized, and pace was precisely what was missing from Eala's serving throughout the match. Caroline Wozniacki framed the broader picture most usefully when she attributed the collapse in the decisive moments to the natural growing pains of a 21-year-old still in the process of learning how to maintain composure when the occasion is at its most overwhelming. That framing is not an excuse. It is an accurate description of a developmental stage that every great player must pass through before they can reliably perform at their ceiling in the highest pressure environments. Reports from Philippine media covering the match also noted a pattern of unforced errors off the backhand wing that seemed to increase in direct proportion to the mounting pressure of the occasion. Pull all of it together into a single picture. A serve that everyone in the sport already knew was structurally fragile. A lefty placement advantage that was not being properly exploited. A mind that had not fully descended from the emotional peak of Saturday. A decider that she handed away through her own unforced errors at the moment that mattered most. That is the complete and honest account of why she lost. And not one element of it is permanent. Why losing might be her greatest win. Remove the disappointment from the result and examine what Eala actually acquired through this Wimbledon run, because the ledger looks entirely different when you focus on the assets rather than the outcome. She banked £300,000 in prize money, roughly $396,000. She collected 240 ranking points that pushed her to a projected career high of world number 28. She became the first Filipino player in the open era of professional tennis to reach the second week of a Grand Slam, surpassing the third-round performances of the Philippine players who competed in the amateur era and establishing a new benchmark for what Filipino tennis is capable of producing. She also became the first Filipino player to win a match on center court at Wimbledon, a distinction that carries its own specific weight in a sport where the grass of the All England Club represents the game's oldest and most prestigious tradition. The public statement she chose to make after the loss said as much about who she is as anything she produced on the court. No bitterness, no deflection, no manufactured perspective designed to manage public perception. She spoke about controlling what is within her control, about approaching the brutal moments of competition with bravery and mental steadiness, and the intensity required to look back without regret regardless of the outcome. Her stated focus on the U.S. Open revealed the mindset of someone who has processed what happened and converted it directly into fuel. She said the week at Wimbledon would only add to her confidence, and that she approaches every match she plays with the genuine belief that she can win it. That is not a diplomatic statement for press consumption. That is the psychological orientation of a competitor who has just measured the gap between where she is and where she wants to be and found it smaller than she had feared before walking on a center court for the first time in the second week of a major. President Marcos articulated the national significance of what she accomplished when he wrote that while this remarkable Wimbledon run may have ended, the world has only begun to understand what Filipino athletes are capable of achieving. That framing is the correct one. The serve can be rebuilt with the right technical coaching and the right volume of dedicated practice. The lefty placement strategy can be refined and drilled until it becomes automatic under pressure rather than something that requires conscious decision-making at exactly the moment when conscious decision-making is most difficult. The nerve failures in the decisive moments of a deciding set become less frequent and less damaging every single time a player survives the experience of being in that situation and lives to compete another day. The talent that dismantled the best player in the world is not going anywhere. It was real on Saturday, and it will be real at the U.S. Open and at every subsequent Grand Slam she enters for the next decade. The gap between Alex Eala and a Grand Slam trophy is real and specific, and she now knows exactly what it consists of. A serve that needs more pace and better placement. A tactical framework for her lefty advantage that needs to be embedded so deeply it survives the pressure of a deciding set. An accumulated archive of high-stakes experience that she is building match by match, tournament by tournament, in exactly the way that cannot be rushed and cannot be shortcut. The real reason she did not win Wimbledon in July of this year is not a tragedy to be mourned. It is a detailed and specific to-do list, and she has the talent, the competitive character, the support structure, and years ahead of her to work through every item on it. Do you believe Alex Eala fixes that serve and lifts a Grand Slam trophy before she turns 25? Or did Paolini expose something that will prove more difficult to correct than the optimists believe? Leave your honest assessment in the comments below.